Okay, so Healthy Homes for All, expanding access to electrification programs for renters in San Mateo County. Thank you so much for coming to this two-part series. This is the second part of the two-part series, and last time we talked about understanding the challenges for renters in San Mateo County, and today we'll be talking about landlords and tenants working towards electrification. I'm with the Thrive Alliance of Nonprofits for San Mateo County, and Anna is also here. She's the Director of Community Resilience at the Thrive Alliance of San Mateo County, and this is sponsored by Peninsula Clean Energy. Today we will be hearing from me, and also I'm Dale, sorry, by the way, and we'll also be hearing from Sean Armstrong, who is the co-founder and managing principal of Redwood Energy, all electric and net zero specialist in multifamily housing, and also from Gerard Manning, a passionate resident of Burlingame, who took a break from his day job in cancer biology to work 50% on climate issues. Thank you so much for coming to our wonderful speakers, and I look forward to getting started. If you're just joining, just please drop your name in the chat. In this session, we look to models both in and outside of the Bay Area to understand the design of home improvement programs that serve single-family and multifamily home renters. We will present best practices for collaboration between landlords and tenants, as well as barriers to their involvement in home electrification programs. So in our last session, I'll just do a brief recap of why we're talking about this. In the Golden State, 45.5% of housing units were occupied by renters in 2020. Recognizing the key role of the power sector in overall decarbonization and other key benefits, the United States has set a goal of 100% carbon pollution-free energy by 2035. And if we hope to reach this goal, we really absolutely have to include rented housing units as part of the equation, because they make up almost half of the housing units in California. So why electrify? Addressing health impacts on low-income communities. There are significant carbon monoxide risks with gas appliances. So by electrifying, you can really improve the indoor and outdoor air quality. Cooking with gas stoves can raise indoor levels of the carcinogen benzene above those found in secondhand smoke, which is a quote from Stanford. And electrification can decrease exposure to indoor air allergens and pollutants linked to conditions like asthma and low birth weights. That's from the Department of Energy. So this is why we care. Energy burdens on low-income communities. Energy burdens are the percent of income spent on energy. 3% is the national average, and low-income communities in California are spending more than the national average. The median energy burden of low-income households is 3 times higher than that of non-low-income households, and the median energy burden of Black households is 43% higher than that of white households. So also, I'd like to note that if the landlord pays utility bills, they get the benefit of the solar. So we have to keep that in mind as well when we talk about costs. And electrification should definitely be paired with weatherization and energy efficiency measures in order to decrease those costs of electrification. So barriers to renter participation in home electrification programs. So first, the limited programs that they're eligible for. Most programs are only available to homeowners. Landlords have concerns and fears about having to make improvements to keep the building up to standards they can avoid by opting out of programs. Just the overall cost can just be a big barrier that people don't want to face. And renter concerns include lack of information. They're not allowed to make those decisions because they don't own the building. Fears of displacement, eviction, and increased rent cost. And most cities allow landlords to pass on building upgrade costs, even to rent-controlled tenants. There's also discomfort in providing personal information to verify income, language barriers, digital literacy barriers, and infrastructure barriers. So Peninsula Clean Energy also offers a $1,000 rebate for an electrical panel upgrade for homeowners. But why we're here today is because Peninsula Clean Energy is our local CCA, and we're helping them to brainstorm how they can expand their programs for renters, even though they have so many great programs for homeowners already. So this is a sample of home electrification programs in San Mateo County that would be able to be used by renters. So the Multifamily Energy Savings Program offers free installation of energy-efficient appliances and other in-unit upgrades at no charge. The Low-Income Energy Assistance Program, LIHEAP, offers one-time financial assistance to help balance an eligible household's utility bill, free energy efficiency upgrades, energy budget counseling, and much more that I couldn't fit because they have such a great program that there's too much to fit on the side. PG&E, borrow an induction stovetop, can lower your energy costs up to 3 times more efficient than gas stoves, And HERA, the High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Program, offers discounts for portable appliances like window unit heat pumps and induction cooktops. We also have the DOE Weatherization Assistance Program that offers sealing holes and cracks around doors, windows, and pipes, repairing or replacing windows, checking efficiency. So these are just a sample of the programs. There are more in San Mateo County. And if anyone knows any more, you can feel free to drop them in the chat. Gerard, I think you might have wanted to iterate more on a program that you think is useful for this slide.
Sure, I'll mention it briefly in my conversation, but basically there are additional statewide rebates that are useful for both equity and non-equity market rate households.
Thank you. So yeah, I just wanted to note that these are the programs. A lot of them are available for heat pump water heaters or HVAC options for renters, induction stoves, but not many for solar or batteries due to the cost and other reasons. So here are some funding navigators that are really useful to finding these programs, and it really allows you to narrow your search so you can find something that really works for you. So the Switches On is a great one. That's Peninsula Clean Energy works with them a lot. Energy Star, which is from the EPA, and Build for the Future from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. These are all great funding navigators, and I'll send this out to all the registrants later too. So existing policy landscape for renters, Berkeley is a leading example. So we would like to use Berkeley as almost like a case study for what could be done across the country. So they have initiatives like all new buildings must be electric. So that started in Berkeley and is now a statewide initiative. They have the rental housing safety program, a rent stabilization board, rent counseling for all renters for free, and the Berkeley Rent Board. They also have rent mediation for rent-controlled units. So we really see Berkeley as a leading example that we could, having these top-down initiatives really helps to just speed up the process a lot. So we want to talk about barriers for single-family home rental electrification, and then on the flip side, barriers for multifamily home renter electrification. Although those are very much interconnected and they share a lot of the same barriers, there are some that might be a little different. So the upfront costs. There is a higher chance that a single-family rental landlord is a smaller landlord with less resources than more commercial multifamily home landlords, which means that they have less resources for upfront electrification costs than commercial landlords. Access to programs and incentives. Single-family landlords may have different levels of access to government or utility programs offering incentives for electrification compared to larger property owners or managers of multifamily properties. So there's barriers for multifamily home rental electrification, might be higher relocation costs just because it's just way more people in those units, higher cost overall. Shared ownership, multifamily properties are often owned by multiple entities or managed by property management companies, leading to complex decision-making processes and coordination challenges for electrification projects. And building infrastructure. Multifamily buildings may have more complex and interconnected infrastructure systems such as shared HVAC systems or electrical wiring, which can complicate the installation of electrification technologies and require specialized expertise. So those are some of the differences because all these buildings are different, so they all need that like a consulting experience where you can really tailor the needs to each home. Who saves, renters or landlords? So as we spoke about before, energy burdens are a huge part of this conversation and the amount that people are spending on their energy, especially in low-income communities. So one of the biggest barriers is just the cost. So if we want people to be able to save money, it's important to note that when a multifamily owner does energy efficiency work or solar, the tenant utility bill can go down if the building has resident paid utilities. If the building is master metered, the owner gets the cost savings from efficiency. However, under environmental justice concerns, many states are implementing laws that are designed to have some mechanism whereby even in master metered buildings, some savings get passed on to residents. So I think it's good to note that it's not necessarily bad that a landlord would save money from a project. I mean, if that's an incentive that gets them to electrify, that's a good thing, but we would also like some of the savings to get passed on to residents as well. And VNAM 3.0 has de-incentivized energy surpluses from solar, meaning landlords will make less money from selling energy back to the grid. And Sean Armstrong will talk more about that policy later. Best practices to address landlord-tenant barriers to electrify. These are just some, I think that we're still in the beginning stages of learning this, but from my research, I think some of the best ones are to add solar when electrifying. I learned that from Sean as well. Policy measures to protect renters, like rent control funding to cover temporary relocation costs, recognizing everyone's situation is different and buildings are unique, and arming with information. Community-based organizations can help renters to learn more and talk to their landlord. Like in our last session, Julio talked about and Rise South Cities work in their community in South San Francisco, and maybe having like a memorandum of understanding between a landlord and a tenant that if the landlord electrifies, then they will not raise that rent for X amount of years. Those kinds of things can really help, at least in the short term. But we want more best practices, so that's why we're here today. Okay, now I would like to pass it along to Sean. Thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely. So happy to be here. Okay, so hey y'all, I'm gonna introduce myself for a second. Are you gonna be forwarding my slides? Is that how we'll be doing this? Dea? Yes? Okay. So briefly, I studied building science. That was what I studied as an undergraduate, and there was a demonstration house on campus here at Humboldt State, now Cal Poly Humboldt. So that's in the upper right-hand corner. Adorable house, lived in it like sort of my senior year of college. It was off-grid, yes. And I grew up on a farm, and I live on a farm, and so I imported this kind of pig called Kuni Kuni. It's one of the only two grass-fed varieties of pig in the world. It was the Maori that bred them, and Kuni Kuni means, oh, fatty, fatty. They're just delighted to have some fat to work with. So yeah, I have a whole other background in farming, but mostly what I want to talk about is building science and affordable housing. So I was a high school science teacher briefly, but I discovered I liked putting solar panels up on the school the most. That was the most rewarding part of it. So I went into affordable housing, innovated zero net energy affordable housing. So the candy colored buildings there, that's 26 houses in Fort Bragg, little senior cottages. And they're all zero positive, like net positive. They make more electricity than they use every year. So no one there has a utility bill. That I lost my job in the Great Recession, so I started a consultancy and started working with lots of other folks, showing how what I'd learned at Danco and at Pacific West Communities, anyone could do. So down the bottom, that's an example. That's affordable housing being built by the Montgomery Housing Authority in Washington, D.C. And it's 12 stories tall of senior housing on one side, mixed use on the other, with a 9-story tall PV wall on the parking garage, as well as canopies. So that's the kind of stuff I'm getting to do around the country, is sort of innovating zero net energy housing in other states, as well as done like 450 projects now in California. Lots and lots. That's my house in the lower left-hand corner. When my mother-in-law died in the Tubbs fire in 2017, we finished electrifying our house. It was like, that was that. So that's our charming little house. Okay, next slide. Now you know who I am a little bit. So California is unique because in 1967, we passed the fuel efficiency standards, the first ones in the country, which is why we're allowed to require electric vehicles. And in affordable housing now, you're seeing in the next code, the Cal Green Code, the next one that's going to come in, that all of the parking spaces, for one parking space per apartment, has to be directly wired to the tenant's actual meter, so that their electric vehicle, when they get one, can take advantage of low-cost residential electricity, not high-cost parking lot electricity. So that's why that 1967 law. And we got an exemption that allowed us to continue acting on that. You see that sometimes in national politics, the federal exemption that we have to require higher fuel efficiency standards. And then in 74, we also in California, all to address the worst air pollution in the nation, which we still have the worst air pollution in the nation, we passed what we call Title 24. Title 24, Chapter 6 is the building code, energy code within it, which is also unique in California. And for a long time, it was forcing California affordable housing to be gas focused as a result of the 2000 energy crisis, which was a gas scam. But nonetheless, now since the code that we're in right now and general policies in the state are pushing for electrification to stop burning fossil fuels. So we're going to get on track. And oh, just so you know, there's actually been a drop of air pollution in the Bay Area in the last few years because of electric vehicles. It's a noticeable documented drop, finally. Next slide. So I mentioned that the Nan died in the Tubbs fire. She died of smoke inhalation, and as a result of that, I hired the lawyers to write an opinion for Berkeley and for all the rest of the cities to figure out how you could ban gas. So those sort of you take grief and you turn it into action. Right? Action is the antidote for despair. But then things, because the years of fires meant that Governor Newsom in 2020 declared a climate emergency, which has changed all the regulations that all of us that are in affordable housing and dealing with equity customers are going to be dealing with in the next 10 years or so. Next slide. So in 2027, there won't be gas water heaters for sale. If you go back, thanks. In the Bay Area, that whole black outlined area, that's the Bay Area. And in 2029, no more gas furnaces for sale in the Bay Area. There'll be zero NOx, it's called. Right now, there's low NOx in California and in Texas, ironically. And now there'll be zero NOx in the Bay Area. And then the state, because of the declared climate emergency, Governor Newsom has directed the state to start phasing out sale of gas, water heaters, and space heating systems statewide in 2030, as well as pretty much everything else by 2035. That's the regulations being adopted right now by the California Air Resources Board. So that does include the sale of gas stoves. Not the same thing as having one, but the sale thereof, right? And you've seen this like with restrictions around wood stoves, outside barbecues, that kind of thing in the cities. This is the same thing, same regulatory authority. Next slide. So this matters because it pushes for electrification. And California, can you put the next slide up for us? Thank you. So I've been a very strong advocate for preserving solar rates, the rates that we have that are called NEM 2.0. Most of the state is under what's called NEM 3.0. Affordable housing, regulated only affordable housing, still has NEM 2.0 rates. And I want to show you what that means on an average apartment complex. So I took data from 47 of our apartment complexes a couple years ago and made these graphs. So the average apartment complex that we're helping was 65 units, and that actually is the average for TCAC housing. The 47 years, if they had no utility bills, that meant maximum rent. Like I was explaining, in affordable housing, there's a relationship between utility bills and rent. It's called the housing allowance for both of those things. So the developer always is working with the housing cap allowance, but within that, higher rent and lower utility bills are interchangeable. So if tenants pay into the rent, which is for their own building, they get better appliances, better energy efficiency out of the building, and a solar array. That's how in new construction this is working in affordable housing. So what that means is that the 47 communities that we worked with over 15 years, they had like a total of $66 million, which we figured out is like $1.4 million per development because we're trying to do averages. The cost of a zero net energy solar rate per apartment complex is about 400 grand. The benefit is about $995,000. That's after you've taken out the solar array. So that net benefit of $1 million per development, that is money that doesn't go to the utility company and does go via rent into the development to the building. The way that gets translated, at least in new construction, is that they're able to build 5% more housing. They're able to ask for 5% less money from the TCAC and preserve that money for others. It's a very competitive process to get the money. So this is a way to get affordable housing built, particularly in rural areas. This is where we started our company because there was no other additional subsidies. So the only thing we could do was make zero net energy developments and compete. Otherwise, there would be no affordable housing in Humboldt County, all of which has been zero net energy since 2011. And there's like nothing before that. This is the way that we figured out how to make a financially solvent rural project. Like I said, we've done it now hundreds of times since then, zero net energy, all electric projects. We make them all electric because if there's a gas bill that still has to be paid by a tenant, that can't be collected as rent. So it weakens the project's finances to have gas bills in it. Now, NEM 2.0 is preserved. That means that right now, for affordable housing and for at least the next 10 years, the utility companies pay you what you pay them, penny for penny. almost every other industry in the state, every other type of housing got VNEM 3.0 or NEM 3.0, which pays like 3 or 4 cents, not 30 cents or 40 cents or 80 cents. It's almost nothing. They pay you 5% of the value that you were getting before under NEM 2.0. So you get 5% of that back for the exported electricity. Okay, so next slide. I just want to see like the politics, because electrifying is more expensive in PG&E territory than it is in SMUD territory. You make money by electrifying in SMUD territory, LADWP, Palo Alto, Turlock, Reading, all over the place you make money, but not in PG&E, not in SDG&E, not in SoCal Edison territories. Break even at best. So because zero net energy, all electric, NEM 2.0 is still the case for affordable housing, I just want to show you like that's what you should do if you can. Here we have on the top of it, this is what it looks like in a year. So when the lines are below the halfway mark, that means that you're exporting electricity into the grid, getting paid for it, and then saving that money up for the winter times when the numbers are above. On the left and the right, that's winter and winter at the end. During a day, you can see our decarbonization. This is the annual offset of carbon we found. It was 99%. This project in Dixon, it's by Sacramento and such, by Davis. So we're really pleased. Like we're just saying, we did it. This strategy of designing to be zero net energy accomplished that as best we could that year with that weather. Next slide. Okay. So I was going to get into some of these technical issues of when and if you electrify, which I'm saying is like an inevitability in all of our professional lifetimes. This is one of the things we're going to be doing with our clients, our tenants, our folks. So there's always this issue of what is the thickness of the wire that is delivered to their building. The thickness of the wire tells you how much electricity can flow through without getting the wire too hot. That's called your service wire. And when you're electrifying, especially if you're adding electric vehicle charging stations, then frequently that would trigger you getting a larger wire delivered, a thicker wire where electricity can flow through. That's expensive. You know, we're talking $1,000 to $3,000 per apartment, and probably delays of 6 months to a year and a half. And when we surveyed 50 people that had gotten service upgrades, we found that more than half the time there was significantly higher costs than they had expected, and there was time delays. So it was like 60% of the time something went wrong, and people had lots of unhappy things to say about that. So I specialize as a consultant in publishing for anyone to read strategies to avoid service upgrades when electrifying apartments and when electrifying homes. Next slide. And I give a monthly show on it called the Ask Sean Show. It's hot cocoa on my teeth there. Any old time, you guys have questions, more than happy to give you free advice. So in apartments, there's usually 30 to 80 amps of service delivered per apartment. That, like I said, equates to a thickness of a wire delivered to that apartment. And that panel that's there, you can change out the panel, but the changing out the wire is the hard part. So if you take out one panel and you stick in a smart panel, the smart panel can take 60 amps, for instance, and make it act like 150 amps. Because usually you don't go past 20 or 30 or tops 40 amps in anyone's house, all electric or not. It's so rare for that to happen. But they have very safe sizes, so you have like a 60 amp panel for 40 or 30 amps of peak demand in a year. So if you put in a smart panel, you'll probably never have to turn anything off ever. But just in case, you can pick a circuit that will turn off if you're going past your 60 amps. And so, oh, I'm going to turn off the air conditioner for 10 minutes because right now the stove is full cranking. It can do that work and make it safe so that you can electrify on your 60 amp service even if you have 100 amps of stuff. That's a lumen on the left and a span on the right. Those are brand names. Those are essentially the two that I would recommend, but there's a few others. EcoFlow has a smart panel. Genius has a smart panel. I don't know of any other sub panels like the lumen, which are good ones for apartments. Next slide. When electrifying, it's so much easier if you don't have to run new wires from that panel that I just showed you through the walls or on the ceiling perhaps in conduit. Just a pain in the butt to have to run electricity to new places. So this water heater on the left is a part of a class, 5 different brands of water heaters that are just designed to plug into any outlet nearby. Any outlet, it's 120 volt. And they're better in the amount of showers they can provide than ones that are 240 volt and have more electricity delivered to them, because these ones rely on a hotter storage temperature. They still give it out at 120, but it's hotter. Next one over, that's a 120 volt space heating system. You can plug it into any outlet. You have to drill 2 holes through the wall, 6-inch holes, but it's pretty minimal, and you have a really efficient, great heat pump for the apartment. The stove, that's the one you're gonna have to run a 240 volt line. You're gonna have to run it from the panel, take it to the ceiling, take it down, put a box on the wall. And then these heat pump dryers. Now, all of these things are cost effective, even compared to other strategies. They're designed that way. There's other things you could do, but these are my recommendations. Get a 120 volt water heater and a 120 volt space heating system, bite the bullet and run a wire for the stove, and put in heat pump dryers. Because electric resistance dryers can actually be a lot of electricity demand. Heat pump dryers use 1/3 as much energy, helps you avoid having to deliver a thicker wire. Next slide. There are sometimes swimming pools associated with affordable housing if the developer is feeling lucky that day. So these are swimming pool heat pumps that would go to just a standard swimming pool you'd find in San Diego or San Jose or whatever. But this is a quick story. This swimming pool is where I taught all my kids how to swim, and it's inside of a greenhouse with bananas and pineapples and a rope swing, and it's nuts. This local rich guy who would buy our chickens back when we had chicken farm scene, he'd stand in line at the farmer's market. He's like, come on over, swim at my pool. Great, we're poor. So when I met him, it looked like this with these solar thermal panels in the lower right-hand corner and a gas pool heater. So the solar thermal doesn't work in the wintertime, just gas. And then he put in a heat pump pool heater, which is electric, and it runs all winter long, collecting energy from the air, which is really heated by the sun. So it's sort of collecting solar thermal energy also, but running on an electric fan, electric pump. So that's how I swim now. It's really warm, like 80 degrees, wonderful. So you can get those, and they're much cheaper to operate than any gas water heater. They use 1/10 as much energy as a gas water heater because they just collect it from the air. It's amazingly efficient to do it this way, and we'll guarantee lower bills. Next slide. Okay, that is for Gerard. Your
Thank
turn.
you so much. Thank you so much, Sean. This was really great. And I just would love to welcome Gerard Manning. Thank you for coming, Gerard, to talk to us today.
Sure. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I actually don't know a great deal about renters and landlords, but I did notice that there's one real sweet spot in building electrification where I think renters and landlords are at a common level even right now. So if I could have the next slide, please. So if you look at where we use gas in our house, and this is the same as where our houses are polluting, you see that half of all of the gas usage is in water heating for our showers, our baths, washing, and so on, with another 1/3 for space heating, and then the rest in smaller chunks. And so I'll talk about water heating very briefly. On the space heating, I think that's where, as Dea said, we run into some of the issues around renters and landlords. If you put in a heat pump for your space heating, then effectively you're also putting in an air conditioning unit. That air conditioning unit costs quite a bit more than a furnace, and it also adds to the value of the apartment. And so then the issue of who pays and what happens to the rent becomes more live. As I said, I don't know a lot about landlords, so I'm going to skip that. If I can go to the next slide. So in case you haven't seen a heat pump, well, you just did with Sean's presentation, but a heat pump water heater is really, really simple. As you can see from the pictures, it looks almost identical to a gas water heater, but it's run by electricity, and it's about 3 or 4 times as efficient, at least, as a gas water heater. That makes it cheaper to run, and because it runs on electricity, and our electricity in San Mateo is all green thanks to PCE, then there's no pollution. Next, please. And this is the sweet spot. So as I'll tell you in a moment, the landlord has the benefit that they can get either a cheap or a free, totally free replacement of a major appliance that they're going to have to replace at some point anyhow. And the heat pumps last quite a bit longer than the gas water heaters, so they'll also have less eventual maintenance. The renter gets a modest to decent savings on their utility bills, and then they also get health benefits from less NOx and particulate pollution. In theory, water heaters vent all of the pollution to the outside, but they don't always work. And when they do vent it to the outside, quite frequently what happens is that pollution just comes back in the window and you or your neighbor are exposed to it. And then for everyone, in fact, everyone on the planet, there are lower CO2 and methane emissions. Speaking of emissions, next slide, please. You probably don't even know where your water heater is, and you certainly don't think about it very often. But it has a massive, it's basically a CO2 generating machine that makes some heat on the side. So a typical gas water heater in this area emits about 2 tons of CO2 equivalent per year. And to put that into some kind of demanding context, that's the same as the total emissions per year of 23 people living in Uganda. Even if you go to a very rich country, it's 2/3. Your water heater is 2/3 the emissions of somebody from Sweden. And if you want to get luxurious about it, if you give up on your gas water heater, at least in terms of emissions, you could then afford to go to Hawaii 5 times a year, flying back and forth. The emissions are that bad. One other way of looking at it is that CO2 is odorless and colorless, so we never see it coming out. But if you were to hook up your gas water heater to this bedroom here, you would fill it with 100% pure CO2 every week of the year. And bear in mind that 10% CO2 is enough to kill you, and 0.1% is the CO2 in the atmosphere. So gas water heaters, even though we don't think about them, are really pretty nasty things. So we want to get rid of them. Next slide, please. And the really good news is that if you are income qualified, then the rebates are so generous that you can pretty much get a water heater for free. And so in the top table here, in San Mateo, roughly the average cost to install a new heat pump water heater is $7,500. But if you do that and you're income qualified, you will get $4,800 back from the tech program run by the state of California. Peninsula Clean Energy will give you another $2,000. And there's another state program called Golden State Rebate that will give you $900. So more often than not, you can get a heat pump water heater installed and your old gas water heater taken away for nothing. And unlike a lot of the other income qualified programs, the income qualification is relative to the local area. So San Mateo is a pretty rich area, and so the income limits vary accordingly. So such that if you want to qualify as a single person living alone, you would have to make $104,000 a year or less, all the way up to a family of 4, $149,000 a year. If you are, next slide, please. If you're not income qualified, it's not all bad. So right now, the tech rebates for what they call the market rate have gone away. But if you tot up everything else and you also add in, there's a 30% tax credit you can get from the Inflation Reduction Act, then your cost to replace is about $3,200, which is within the ballpark of what it would take to get a gas replacement. So if your gas water heater is running out and you make too much money, you can still get a heat pump water heater and all of the health and savings benefits for pretty much no investment cost. And I will just say the tech rebates are so generous. Even for the market rate, they were about, I think, $3,800 per unit. They're stopped right now, but they are going to come back. We don't know exactly at what level or when. But for people who want to save money and are on the market rate, it would be a sensible thing to call up a contractor now, see what it would cost to get an installation, and then when the rebates come back out again, go grab them before they run out again. Okay, next slide, please. So that's basically the punchline for heat pump water heaters. There's one additional thing that I think is actually a remarkable opportunity, and it speaks to what our work today can have an influence that is truly global, and it's really kind of amazing. So let me walk you through that. So, the bad news is that we've got a climate crisis. The worst news is that it's still getting worse. So in 2023, we had record emissions of CO2. So for all of the things that we're doing to slow climate, we haven't really moved the needle yet. We need to do more. We need to continue to get newer ideas and newer approaches. Next slide. The good news is that a lot of those ideas have already come to fruition. So here you see the same trend of CO2 emissions, but it's broken down per person across 6 major countries or regions. And you can see that in the US, we've actually dropped dramatically. So back in 2000, our emissions were at least twice as much per person as anybody else in the world. Now they've come down to only about 50% more. So we've had a 25% drop in just 20 years. We still need to go faster, but it shows that we are making changes. And really that can be our gift to the world, is finding out new ways to reduce emissions. Next slide, please. And that really, I think, is where San Mateo comes in. We are kind of half of Silicon Valley, and so a tremendous amount of people here are working on inventing the future, whether it be consumer electronics or policies or new heat pumps, new inventions. The people who live here are very pro-climate. Our leaders are very pro-climate. People are well educated. There's pretty good funding for a lot of programs that can help do new things on climate change. And of course, we're very sensitive to climate change, between our poor air quality, all of the bay shoreline that we have that's going to flood, and all of the forests that are going to burn. So next slide, please. And this really is my key slide that I want everyone to think a little bit about. One huge change that is proposed is that the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, who is in charge of our outdoor air quality, is proposing, as Sean said, to end all gas water heater sales by 2027. This is not actually a climate issue. This is because the outdoor air pollution from your vented water heaters is killing about 50 to 80 people a year from respiratory illnesses. It's causing thousands to tens of thousands of asthma attacks, and it's also having severe effects on COPD and a number of other respiratory diseases, largely on people that we don't tend to notice, but your gas water heater is contributing to killing people. And so this rule would affect 7 million people in the Bay Area. And as Sean said, CARB, the California Air Resources Board, is also looking at a similar rule statewide. So the most important thing is that this is a big change. They want to change it such that nobody buys gas water heaters anymore. And there are a lot of sort of naysayers at this moment. So the proposed rule is facing headwinds. Anything that any of us can do to increase understanding of water heat pumps, increase installation, increase acceptance of them, is really important to making sure that this proposed rule actually becomes a real rule and then is accepted by everybody. And in particular, BACMD has expressed their concern about equity, in particular for low-income individuals, for impacted communities, and for renters. And all three groups have had less than average uptake of water heaters and other electrification measures. So my punchline, my prayer to you all is that your outreach to low income and renters will help make a massive change that will impact global CO2 emissions. Next slide. And so very briefly, if you can change one person's mind, that's the one at the left, that may help change the needle for 7 million people in the Bay Area, for 40 million people in California. And then that kind of momentum, it changes the technology of heat pumps, it changes the procedures that we use to install them, it changes the models for financing, it makes the entire thing run much more smoothly and makes it much, much easier for other states and other areas to electrify. Next slide, please. So again, water heaters are a sweet spot for everybody. The landlord gets a cheap, if it's income qualified, or free replacement of a major appliance. Heat pump water heaters tend to last 15 to 20 years as opposed to 10 to 20 years. So it's something they can install and then forget for a long time. The renters get savings on their utility bills in the order of maybe a few $100s per year, and they get health benefits from less pollution. And then everyone gets both the individual benefit of lower emissions from a water heater, as well as the potential of setting really dramatically new policy through BACMD and CARB if their rulings go ahead. And last slide, please. So if you want more information on the nitty-gritty of installing, I built a guide, and it's at this website, sanmateo.cleanhotwater.info, that's specifically for San Mateo residents on how to install water heaters, how much they will save, how to get the rebates, etc. And if you have any questions whatsoever, please email me, and my email is up there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, both of you. I would love to just like wrap that up by these presentations up by saying I really appreciate the holistic views that you've both presented today, both Sean and Gerard, and the practicality, focusing Gerard on like the heat pumps, or the water heaters specifically, and why that's like a practical solution for everybody. Sean, also, I'm so sorry for your loss, and thank you so much for like really using your grief to make something good happen in the world, and all of the work that you're doing is really inspiring. I've learned so much today. So if we have any questions for the speakers, we could take those now. And also, I do have a discussion question here to kind of prompt the discussion. But first, let's just see if there's any questions, and then we'll go into that part.
I have a question for Sean. I also wanted to say thank you so much for these two really informative presentations. I wanted to ask, Sean, are you only electrifying multifamily units in homes that are not in PG&E, I guess PG&E areas? So I guess that are not manned by PG&E, and so rural areas, if that's correct. And do you have a solution for electrifying home? Sorry.
I work all over the state in like all the different utilities in the cities and the country, but we started in the country is what I was trying to say.
Okay, and I guess you were saying that really you're only able to save money through electrifying appliances in non-PG&E territory. There was some comment made
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
that is a consistent finding that we've had, is that if you're taking out gas loads in a building and putting electric loads in, that because our governor's PUC has allowed the highest rates in the nation for electricity, it is not a savings the way it would be almost everywhere else in the country, like 80–90% of the country's land mass. We would save money because that's how the efficiency of heat pumps work, unless you're in California's Wall Street-owned utilities, the ones that are the #1 donor to the governor's campaign. #1. So that's where we are now, where you'd want to put solar, even just a tiny amount, like 1/10 of a kilowatt. Houses usually would have, like, on average, the average house has about a 5 kilowatt, 4.5 kilowatt system. I'm talking about 1/10 of 1 kilowatt is enough to make a difference. So if you can put any solar on for the tenants, then you guaranteed won the game. But if you haven't, then at best they're just cost even, or maybe it's going to cost them $20 more that year, or $50 or $80 more that year. Not criminal amounts of money, but you can't say that it saved them. So.
Okay, yeah, thank you for explaining. That was really helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I was wondering if Sean could add a little bit more about the NEM 2.0 for affordable housing, in particular, what affordable housing qualifies for that, and that I'm assuming retrofits could also qualify. If you could add a little bit more about that, that'd be great.
Certainly. Okay, so let me bring up a document for you. I was just saving it earlier today into my CPUC folder. Okay, almost there. I'll share my screen now. That's okay. Oh, can I share my screen, please, Dave? Thanks.
Do you have capacity to share your screen?
It says host disabled participant screen sharing. As a participant, I can't do it yet. Well, I'll say things like when I can share, or if I can share, in 2021, we succeeded in getting the California Public Utilities Commission to expand the VNEM, virtual net energy metering, which means one array is divided up among multiple apartments, but it's one physical array. So they expanded VNEM outside of affordable housing that qualified for MASH or for SOMA, which are these two different programs California has to put solar panels on affordable housing. And they said, you don't have to participate in those programs. It can be any affordable housing. Any regulated affordable housing can get the VNEM structure.
You should be able to share now,
Okay,
if you would like.
there. Okay, so this letter, clarification to electric schedule NEM2 V MASH to preserve a pathway for affordable housing projects, Public Utilities Commission. So this advice letter 6134EA is what you might be looking for if you're trying to get a document. Because a lot of people don't realize that essentially this rate, which was exempted from the VNEM rulings, right? In the language, I can't remember which page, but I can get to that email in a second, but trust me for a second, that the VNEM ruling that just came out, which is new share, I think, is that the one I'm gonna, no, that's not here. Okay, so this is the ruling before the PUC. This is the VNEM one. You can see from the table of contents, it's all VNEM. So these two documents, the VNEM document that just came out exempts anyone who qualifies for that rate that I just showed you, that NEM to MASH rate. So that's the subcategory. If you're regulated affordable housing and you are doing a virtual net energy meter, and it's really just the virtual one, then you get to keep the NEM 2.0 rates, in which you get paid for the same amount of money for your electricity as you're paying. So that's the tiny little funnel. And it took a whole bunch of advocacy. Give credit to a woman named Mary Ellen Shea, who's a lobbyist for an association of cities and nonprofits that do affordable housing. She got the governor to relent on that one thing.
And brief follow-up, is that also, do you know if that includes deed restricted affordable housing?
All deed restricted affordable housing qualifies for the NEM MASH. That clarification that they were making, oh, not that, sorry. Too many things open here, try again. New share, that one. This clarification, which I can send y'all, this clarification purpose. At the request, PG&E is submitting the supplemental advice letter to remove a proposed footnote regarding participation. And they like just tweaked it. And current language says these are 3 different ways to qualify: a MASH program, a new solar homes program, or LIWIP. And pathways for future affordable housing, they're going to remove the phrase received incentives under and replace it with are or would have been qualified for the incentives. That's how they expanded it to all the affordable housing, is just qualified. Removal of the phrase until all funds available for the incentives have been allocated. Just goes on indefinitely now, doesn't have a tie to the rebate program. Removal of the sentence once all the available MASH funds have been allocated. Once again, schedule will be closed to new customers. Nope, it's staying open so that we can always use this little structure for affordable housing that could have qualified for these 2 programs. Addition of footnote, customers may elect to serve accounts located at multiple customer service delivery points within their eligible low-income development so as to fully utilize their solar generator also sited within their eligible low-income development. Okay, multiple customer service points. That means multiple wires coming into one parcel, or even multiple parcels next to each other. Multiple wires can be allocated, because they used to be like, oh no, that wire can't get solar electricity billed to it from that wire, even though it's all in the one project. So it's like, no, everything gets sort of done at the billing department. Don't get all weird about the wires. And I don't know what removal provision D was. So, but this is this idea. It's indefinite and it's open to all affordable housing that could qualify for SOMA or MASH. And you should look carefully at what allows you to do SOMA, because disadvantaged communities that aren't regulated affordable housing qualify for SOMA. So you could have a market rate apartment complex get a SOMA rate. Now all of a sudden they're eligible too. You have to work on that one, but I think that the language allows that then. I'm going to send this to you right now, Dea, and then you can send it on to folks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You betcha.
Do we have any more questions before we move on to this discussion question? Okay. So I would like us to just direct our attention to this question to ground us back to just to kind of tie everything all together. So, what are some of the most effective ways to encourage or incentivize landlords to invest in electrification upgrades for their rental properties? And I would like to just open this up to everyone. Of course, Sean and Gerard are also both welcome to answer this. So, any ideas here?
Well, I'll take a quick whack at it. So in regulated affordable housing, when the rent goes up and as the utility bills go down, while people don't have an increased housing expense, they just get a better apartment out of the deal. I've found that, like right now, I'm working with landlords who are trying to add solar and electrify their apartments at the same time, so that they can collect greater rent. And once again, it's still protected. So in my world, that makes all the sense in the world. If you have the ability to put in electrification and solar, then your project cash flows better and the tenants are happier. You just got new appliances and new solar for everybody. So it works well in regulated affordable housing, as long as you don't actually exploit people. Because once you have that cap there that everyone agrees is a fair cap, 30% of their income, then you can work within that without harming them, hopefully, in a way that does the electrification and solar. Your turn, Gerard? Oh, we can't hear you though. We still can't hear you.
Okay, I double unmuted. Thanks. Something very simple is just getting the information out. I think particularly in the San Mateo area, there are a lot of very small landlords who are not full-time apartment managers, and they just don't know about these things. We heard in the last session that some tenants are afraid to talk to their landlords because they're afraid that something bad will happen. They don't want to upset the apple cart. And so in some cases, it's fine, I think, for the tenant to reach out, and it would be helpful if we had a kind of a cheat sheet for how to talk to your landlord about electrification. But I think in other ways, it would be helpful if we could find the landlords associations or find out where the landlords are at and have somebody like PCE or a CBO talk to them and just very quickly pitch, this could be economically beneficial for you as well as saving the planet.
I have a thought, which is that I wish that the regulated framework that I worked within was at least published as a best practice for other market rate landlords. If it'd be even better, of course, as a policy for everyone, it was rent regulated, but we all know that we have to electrify these buildings and ideally add solar, and then it's going to cost money. I wish that there was a standard thing, like in San Mateo County, if you electrify the water heater, then you deserve a $20 a month rent increase to pay for it. And everyone should agree that that's fair because it costs some amount of money and it gets paid back. And I wish that there was that, even if we couldn't force it, if we could at least discuss it as a reasonable thing in order for tenants to get what they're looking for and society to get what we're looking for. But the reason I point out best practices is because the temptation to be exploitive is, of course, built into capitalism, which is why I feel like we need to say it loudly and clearly that there's a fair way and an unfair way to do these rent increases and to be specific. I think Julio, you were going to say something. Sorry for getting in front of you.
Sure, that's okay. Thank you. I think one of the incentives that we need to be thinking, and that's cities and counties, specifically in San Mateo County, is property tax breaks for small apartment buildings. Probably the ones that are like between 20 and under, so we can start working with those property owners and cities to decrease their property taxes for an amount of years. Let's say if you install this, we want to give you a property tax break for the next 10 years. And that's a lot of money because, as you know, they probably ended up paying like $5,000 to $6,000 a year for property taxes. So that's something that we need to be looking at. I know that is going to be an incentive for them, but a disincentive for city because a lot of cities rely on property taxes. But that's something that we need to be thinking in order to start mobilizing electrifying buildings.
Yeah, tax breaks work for people who have a tax burden.
Thank you so much, all of you, for bringing all of those topics up. I think also, I think the information is really important. I did invite the San Mateo County Realtors Association to invite landlords, and I did, try to bring more landlords and renters to the conversation. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, so sorry about that. But I think we're still having a really good conversation here today, and I think that it would be great. I could just imagine like a big conference of landlords and like happening where people present this kind of information would be really, really powerful. I know there was a cool energy conference in San Francisco on this week that was, I think, geared toward like utility scale energy. So I'm not sure whose audience that would be, but I think that, yeah, an in-person conference for landlords would be really interesting, or just people that have power in that way to develop properties. Kirsten.
Yeah, I wanted to bring everyone's attention to the link I put in the chat to the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, BayREN. And that is a collaboration of local governments. So it's a collaboration of San Mateo County Department of Sustainability here locally and all the other counties. And they have a program for multifamily buildings to help electrify them. And they have free technical consulting and financial incentives for electrification. So I recommend sending landlords to that resource. And frankly, that's one reason why Peninsula Clean Energy doesn't do as much work in this space, because BayREN does good work in this space.
Well, I'll put out there, I've talked with BayREN recently. I just presented on their rebates.
Okay.
And they only have rebates right now for induction stoves and heat pump dryers because they're acknowledging that in the past they've given most of their rebate incentives to high-income households that arguably the money didn't change their behavior at all. It was just giving the money. That's their internal critique. So they've shut down giving incentives while they're reworking it to make it so that the money goes to households in need and does more shaping of behavior. So they do have those two appliance incentives, and they're going to have some kick-ass incentives soon where they try to do better with their money.
Sean, are you referring to the single family and multifamily incentives?
I think I'm thinking of multifamily because that's all I work in.
Okay.
Well, no, I mean, I did just doing this presentation, and I think it's for both. For BayREN right now, it's for retrofits. I believe it's dryers, stoves, and then they give incentives for like insulation and air tightness. But for electrification per se, I don't think they have anything for HVAC and for hot water
That's
right
not what their website is saying. If you click on that link.
now.
For single family, they have abandoned them as of, I think, April 15th. And I was just talking to somebody from there yesterday. Multifamily, I'm not sure about.
Yeah, Sean, I'm interested in your thoughts
Yeah,
on
I
this
see
link
what
I
you're
put up.
I see what you see. And I mean, I just had this correspondence with them recently, and so I think that we don't have a good answer, but I see what the website says. It's got all good electrification stuff there. It's all heat pump water heaters and HVAC. So maybe they just came out with it and I don't have my timing right.
No, they have not.
I think it is in your program.
Okay.
They have not updated their website. They do have a PDF that they sent me that shows that they no longer do the heat pump water heater rebates, and so a bunch of things in their website need updating.
Interesting.
Ah, okay.
Well, updating information is always going to help. Information barriers. Does anyone else have any comments regarding this question? All right, well, thank you so much. I think it's we can wrap up now. I just want to, unless anyone has any more comments, Sean.
Well, Brian was saying that he has a he's a 1-unit landlord. So I was going to say, I think it should cost about $23,000 to do all the appliances ahead of time. Keep in mind, if a stove breaks, the incremental cost of replacing the stove to make it electric is really the extra cost versus just the cost of the stove. So these are all not incremental costs, just the whole cost. 23 grand per apartment, I think, is the right price based upon tech data, based on the San Joaquin Valley proceedings data that came out. Whole bunch of different data sources, I'm saying, 23 grand. in that range per residence. So then ask yourself, if I went and got a loan, what would be the interest rate? What is the rent increase I need? And also, do I include a 15% profit because it's a business and to take care of hedging against risk and things like that? So that is the process I would follow. And I think that just generally for affordable housing, if we could have that conversation, is how do we pay off 23 grand on average per residence in a fair way? Or is it not 23 grand? Is it only 3 grand? You know, because just incremental cost of some rewiring and a little bit of extra cost for the water heater? Is it then fair for the tenants to pay just 3 grand and you had to pay the other 20 because that's your job as a landlord? That's another one. Is like, we should talk about this a little bit so that people will do electrification. You know, but not now. Now we all have another afternoon thing to go do. But Brian,
No,
send
this
me
is
an email
great.
if you
I
have-
think
yeah.
that I really appreciate even just any appliance that we can get to be replaced is a great gain, especially what Gerard was talking about. Even just one appliance can emit so much. So it does matter. Every single appliance matters to replace. So thank you so much for really taking the time to tailor your answers to everybody. And yeah, I just want to thank our presenters and thank Peninsula Clean Energy for sponsoring this today. Also, I want to thank Anna because she came up with this topic to discuss today, and she's been helping behind the scenes for all of this. So yeah, thank you for everyone and your engagement today, and we will send out the slides for both of the sessions and also the recordings when we get those.
Great. Thanks, y'all. You take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.